for joining us for today's Ipsos virtual roundtable discussion about becoming more accessible and tips for keeping inclusion initiatives at the heart of your research. Today's roundtable guests are among the most talented executives in the industry, and you can read more about them in the slides in front of you. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Janelle James, Senior Vice President with Ipsos UU. Janelle, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I am so thrilled to host this conversation with so many amazing executives that you'll get the chance to meet. But would love to start by sort of grounding us in where we are and what we're going to be talking about today. We as a society typically create communications, products, and even laws to be consumed, received, and implemented under perfect circumstances, when in reality, few perfect scenarios exist for consumption. Let's take TV ads or any video that can be consumed on demand. What would you add, change, or remove, knowing that a third of the people watching the video can't or won't hear it? 13% of Americans are blind or low vision. How would you reimagine packaging or a mobile app, keeping that in mind? A woman with an intellectual disability is 12 times more likely to be sexually assaulted. How would you reimagine any technology, media, or communications device, keeping that in mind? We have an opportunity to look at a prime prospect for inspiration, but use the lowest common denominator in all of our audiences for implementation. How would this mindset reorient your work? That's the impetus for today's conversation. And I'm excited to have Lee, Noah, Wendy, and Todd and Deborah here today to talk about empathy in design and connecting with people with varying levels of ability. When we talk about ability at Ipsos UU, we consider a wide range of challenges: neurodiversity, body size, chronic illnesses, sensory, physical, or cognitive disabilities, and mental health. So that range is the backdrop for today's conversation. Additionally, we love to explore intersectionality with all audiences. And part of what we'll try to do today is understand what empathy can look like when identities and experiences converge, like ability, class, gender, race, age, and even military status. With that, I'd love for us to jump into the conversation. As always, I love for our guests to introduce themselves. So if we can start with Noah, tell me a little bit about what you do currently, your role, how it touches working with people or connecting with people of different ability levels, and if you can share a recent project or initiative that you've worked on, that would be great as well. So Noah,
sure,
go
thanks,
for it.
Janelle. Yeah, so my name is Noah Rosenblatt-Farrell. My title is Qualitative Research Strategist, but I have been doing strategy consulting and market research for about 20 years. I'm a moderator, so a lot of what I do is just talking to people, having conversations, usually 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever it is, really trying to get to know people and understand what's going on for them. My background is that I have a PhD in visual studies, and before I came to Ipsos, I actually worked for 12 years as a professional photographer, and my specialty was photographing people who didn't like to be photographed, which included a lot of people, actually. And my feeling is that there's beauty in everyone, and it's kind of the photographer's job to find that beauty and bring it out through the image. Before I even started my research career, I worked in a surgical oncology office, and I saw a lot of patients come through who came in feeling good, feeling healthy, and then kind of had to transition either because of amputations or complications through surgery, and just learning to deal with those, adjust to those new conditions really opened my eyes. Recently, in terms of projects that I did, I actually just finished research with a population with limited vision, thyroid disease, and vision conditions. I've also worked with populations of people who have mental illness, and yeah, a lot of really in-depth learnings from people. In-home research is something that I really like because it gives me a chance to see other aspects of their life, not just the topic that we're talking about. So I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks for having me.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Todd, you're up next. If you could take about a minute to introduce yourself and tell us about what you do and how you touch people with all levels of ability.
Sure. So I'm Todd Torville. I'm an interpreter educator. I'm a professional sign language interpreter, have been for 30, I don't know, I don't do the math, 30 plus some odd years. Anyway, I've worked full-time as faculty in interpreter training programs. I do a lot of freelance interpreting work. I've worked in legal systems, mental health systems, medical, chemical dependency, all kinds of sort of systems in that regard. I do actually currently work as a video relay interpreter, and so that would be me sitting on a TV screen. A deaf person connects via video phone, talking to their doctor, let's say. But what's interesting about that sort of venue is it's the Jetsons, it's the video TVs of the cartoon era, which are new and now we actually have them. But I'm in somebody's living room, so when you meet somebody in public and you're working with them, that venue, am I frozen? Can anybody hear me?
No, you're good.
Yeah,
Everyone on my screen's frozen. Oh, I'm good. Okay, all right. You're all frozen on my screen, so I don't know if I disconnected. So anyway, that's me. I'm an educator, a person who's worked in conferences. I work a lot with people with all kinds of disabilities. Deafness affects a lot of people and a lot of multiple disabilities. So yeah, that'll be me in a nutshell. There you go.
Wonderful. Deborah, you're up next.
Yes, hi, my name is Deborah Charette, and I am a population health and outcomes expert in the public health and policy series sectors. I've worked over about 20 years plus in challenges related to health equity, health equality, and outcomes research. And I partner right now with several different types of doctors in oncology, for example, MDs, PhDs, scientists, PIs, and so forth. And the recent project that we worked on, for example, is one where we did a pilot bringing different caregivers and patients in contact with actual doctors and PhDs, as well as students in training, scientists and medical doctors to be. And the purpose of that was to understand how, or have them understand each other and be able to communicate. In other words, when you're being trained as a doctor in oncology or any type of medicine, you don't typically get to work with a patient until you actually meet one. Their experiences typically are with the mice in the lab. So when they finished and they walk into the office and there's a patient and it's like, oh, so who are you? So the purpose of getting them to understand the actual patient, who is not a mouse, and to understand their needs, their cares and concerns, in an effort to also be able to improve clinical trials and outcomes research. So I'm a part of 2 think tanks, or probably more than that, but primarily with health equity and population health with the University of Virginia, Greenbaum Healthcare Oncology Center, as well as cancer prevention and cancer outcomes research.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Lee, you're up next.
All right, hey everybody, thank y'all for the opportunity. Lee Stuckey, I just retired from the Marine Corps after over 22 years. I've been running A Hero, which is America's Heroes Enjoying Recreation Outdoors, for almost 13 while on active duty. We brought in over 11,000 service members and saved hundreds from suicide. Also I was a founder of Operation Phoenix, which is another nonprofit that focuses on giving veterans and first responders a new sense of purpose through wildland firefighting, prescribed burning, and natural resources. And then I've been hired by Tall Timbers Research to do prescribed fire, and really just been an awesome opportunity after retirement to continue to give back to the community, continue to help impact the state of Alabama, which is where I'm from. No longer be a guest in Alabama, be back living here, which is great. And the new program that we've been working with all of our supporters, with the help of Tall Timbers, Operation Phoenix, A Hero, Mid-South RC&D, which is Resource Conservation Development, and the other partners that we have locally in Alabama, is getting veterans and first responders out of their house, having them trained on wildland firefighting, prescribed fire, regardless of whatever injuries they may have, as long as it's safe, and showing them a new sense of purpose and a new thing that they can do to get outside of their heads and get out of their house and give back to their community. And the impact, you can see it. And if you can't because of visual impairment, you know it from being told that you're making an impact on the state and you're improving natural resources. And veterans and first responders, we have an identity crisis. And when I retired as a major in the Marine Corps, there was a uniform, there was a job associated with that uniform, and now I'm just Lee. And I have to remind veterans and first responders, that's not your identity. The military and being a first responder was your ability to grow and learn new things, but I've always been Lee. And so if I can get them to shift their focus on that doesn't define them, that was just a chapter in your life. Now let's move to chapter 3 and build off what the military and being a first responder taught you with those core values and give back. So it's just really neat to have everybody step up and believe in what we're doing and continue to help people and save their lives from suicide.
Wonderful. So glad to have you, and thank you for your service, Lee. Wendy,
Thank
you're
you.
up next.
Hi, my name is Wendy Grauer, and I'm a senior qualitative consultant on the Ipsos team. I've been moderating for 25 years, and I have a passion for including plus size and consumers with disability in my research because there is so much information that you can gather by the workarounds that a lot of these consumers are having to perform with products and services that can provide great innovation insights for the general population. So I have a child with high functioning autism, and I've worked for 17 years as a brand leader, or for a brand leader in diversity and inclusion, designing experiences for consumers with disabilities. And I'm currently wrapping up a global tech project that included a representation of insights from able-bodied, blind, and wheelchair respondents from the US, Germany, and Japan.
Wonderful. So glad to have you guys. The thing that I love to do at the start of these conversations is have everyone come up with a nickname for themselves, but not any old nickname. I'm interested in your nickname that helps me understand what your priority is when you're connecting with or serving people with disabilities. So I know that's kind of a creative or a weird task, but I'm gonna ask each of you to share a nickname with me. So Wendy, do you want to get us started?
Sure. So I nickname myself the All Abilities Advocate because our clients have assumptions about how the general population is using their products and their services. Yet many are often pleasantly surprised by the insights that we gather through the depth of qualitative research, even from a fairly familiar target demographic.
Yeah.
So imagine the insights learned when a client engages consumers in those collaborative conversations who don't have the ability to see, to hear, to move about easily. So when we invite consumers with disabilities to the table, we're not only breaking down barriers and interrupting bias by advocating, for these marginalized groups, we're ideating and we're innovating for populations who are creating their own workarounds to maneuver the marketplace. And they're modifying products to effectively and efficiently meet their needs. So we can learn so much from them that can increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the masses as well.
Okay. Noah, nickname.
I gave myself the nickname the Transporter because what I tend to do is talk to people and get information from them and then try to deliver it to the clients and help them understand. And especially with this population, I find that there's a lot that happens in that transport process because so much is going on in the lives of the people that I'm interviewing that can be really challenging for the clients to understand if they don't aren't familiar with that population. So that's my
The Transporter. Lee, you're up next. Nickname.
Yeah, mine would be the Lifeline. And my mother was my lifeline back in 2009 when I was struggling after a combat deployment, and I went to take my own life, and I was pulling the trigger on a pistol, and my mother called my cell phone as I was committing suicide and saved me at that exact second, which started a nonprofit and helping over 11,000 now. So now I want to be the lifeline for everybody else and make sure that A Hero is the beacon of light and hope for all of those that are struggling.
I love that your mother was an inspiration and literally a lifeline, and that you've turned that into something to help others. That is amazing. Todd, nickname.
I'm going to go with the Wizard, as in of Oz, because I'm that guy behind the curtain that you're not supposed to see, but is always there and doesn't really, it can't really be hidden and is sometimes bigger than life or whatever it is. Because I actually, you take something from culture A and try to get it to culture B and make that an equivalent. And you connect people, you bring them what they always thought they had inside. I mean, it's just all that sort of magic that if you do it really well, it's great magic. If you do it really bad, it's really not pretty. So yeah, I would go with the wizard.
I love that, the wizard. You guys are doing so well with this. And last but not least, Deborah, what's your nickname?
My nickname is Tigger, which I have been called by several members of my family as well, because if you know about Tigger, Tigger tends to bounce into a situation very quickly to offer assistance and to support whatever the need happens to be, and without hesitation. So that is the nickname that I've chosen for myself, as well as family and friends.
Love it, love it. You guys did an excellent job with this. Pivoting a little bit, you know, there's so many ways to look at this segment. I mean, people with disabilities, it's so complex. And so I'm curious, how do you define people or consumers with disabilities? Is there anything that's different or unexpected today? Noah?
I mean, I think that's a great question, because I think that one of the things that just comes to mind right now is I remember interviewing a patient who had hemophilia, and he was talking about the idea that there are moments where he feels very able-bodied and able to really do just about anything, and then will have a bleed and suddenly kind of be incapacitated by his condition. And that really got me thinking about the fluidity of disability, that everyone has different abilities, and that it really isn't a disability until there's something that you want to achieve or a situation that you want to be in that you can't participate in. So I think for me, a lot of times it's defined by what we're trying to learn, what we're, thinking the population should look like, and then kind of making questions about that and seeing where there are opportunities to include more people that we might not initially be considering.
Yeah. To follow up on that, visible versus non-visible disabilities or challenges. In your role, which is more challenging to advocate for or to serve? Tell me a little bit about that.
For me?
Yeah.
Ooh, I think that they're challenging in different ways, right? Because the thing about an invisible disability is that it might not get recognized. It may not even come out until the conversation is going on. And I think that people who have invisible disabilities, if we're not aware of them, as they start to manifest, they can be misinterpreted. And I see this happen all the time, and especially have talked to people who have disabilities that aren't very visible, and they describe, being in situations where suddenly they can't do something, where their disability is manifested, and then people judge them or question them or dismiss them or even call the police in certain cases. I think with visible disabilities, the challenge is that those people may be used to people staring at them, or people, assuming that they need help that they don't actually need, or just being ignored is something as well if people are not comfortable with it. So I think that for me, I sometimes will think whether there's visible disabilities that I'm aware of, there could always be invisible disabilities that I'm not aware of and that I won't find out until we get into the conversation and get into the research. So I kind of assume that everybody has something, and that it's good to kind of listen for what they're revealing to me, and so that I can understand what it is exactly and then learn from it.
Yeah,
that's a great point. Yeah, I was going to say, Noah, that a lot of times people spend their lifetime keeping their disabilities hidden. Respondents might not be comfortable revealing they have Asperger's, autism already. But uh-oh, can you hear me?
Can you say that again?
We can hear you now.
Because I want to hear it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I was just saying that, a lot of times respondents will spend a lifetime hiding that disability from the world because they want to be accepted and included by others that they're afraid might judge them. As humans, we find it easier to understand and empathize with those physical disabilities that we can see. So we notice signals such as a missing limb or a cane or a wheelchair, and we open doors and offer to help others that we see are in need. But when those consumers with non-visible disabilities like anxiety or ADHD or autism, they don't look any different from the outside, compared to their able-bodied peers. But the world expects the same from them. And also brands interact no differently with them. So I think that's just an important consideration. And I really love the point that you made, Noah, about just walking into a situation thinking that, everybody has something.
Yeah.
I mean, from a veteran aspect too, the suicide, until I started talking about my issues and depression, anxiety, and everything else, once I opened up as a leader and as an officer in the Marine Corps, my Marines started telling me that they were going through stuff. And as a leader, if you don't talk about your problems, you're not going to know your Marines or civilians the same way. If you're in a leadership role, they have to relate to you. And when I went and said, hey, I'm going through these struggles, I'm going through these issues, then they opened up, and then people started sharing with me. And that's where we came up with screen porch therapy, which is what we do out at the farm. We talk about it, and we solve the world's problems on a screen porch in Alabama. But there's not veteran post-traumatic stress, and there's not veteran anxiety and veteran depression. It's just depression. And like Noah said, you expect everyone to have this. It's not a weakness. And that's the stigma in the Marine Corps, and the stigma in the military is if you talk about it, you're going to get judged and you're a weak military person. It shouldn't be seen as a weakness. You're an adult. If you're going through this stuff, the normal adult that's going through struggle, because we all struggle at some point in our life. And the other point about not knowing, I've had events where we had a triple amputee and he was present, and then my father specifically said, well, what's wrong with that guy? Why is he here? Just physically, visually, he saw the guy with missing limbs. The guy he pointed to was a Marine I deployed with. And in a previous deployment, he had lost everyone in his team, and he was the only one who survived. So though he wasn't affected physically, he was awake to hear every single person get blown up. He smelled, saw, and heard everything that happened to his entire team, and he witnessed all of it. So his post-traumatic stress and his nightmares, he saw everything that happened. And I'd argue he's more wounded than the guy that's missing the limbs, because that guy was blown up, and I know his specific story. He was unconscious when he got blown up. So though physically and visually he looked more injured, the other guy, the trauma was through the roof, and I had to take extra care with him. So we have to be cautious before we say, well, why is that person involved in this? And I judge Noah's trauma. I can't judge Wendy's depression. I can't say, well, it didn't sound like she went through a lot. That's your struggle. That's your anxiety. That's your depression. And regardless of what caused it, I can't judge it or say that doesn't bother me, because it bothers you.
And I know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go for it.
That it's also compounded, the non-visible disabilities, when it's a person of color or a person of the LGBT community, where they already have a sense of isolation and not being seen or not being heard, and then add on and compounded by a disability that is non-visible. So again, appreciating what Noah was saying as well, and you as well, Lee, about being able to come to the party, as I like to say sometimes, from a place of humility and understanding that we don't know specifically, if it's non-visible, what someone is going through or what their health crisis may be in that particular moment.
I mean, what an amazing, I think, tool or gift in terms of creating empathy, to just acknowledge that everyone could have something. I think it's also incredibly empowering. And I think as a marketer and a market researcher, it just makes me think, this is something that we could literally include in every brief when we think about the audiences that we want to connect with, just in a really practical way. I'm also curious, is there like a trend or a technology advancement or phenomenon that you found has been most influential or even disruptive when we think about your role today in connecting with people of various ability levels?
Well, I think that the digital worlds, so video, our phones, our watches, I mean,
Yes.
that's all. Technology has been awesome, but it's also been horrific. Technology, I think, is really designed more for that, for me, And I'm a white male who's living in Southern California, who owns a home, blah, all that sort of, so that demographic on the outside looks really cool. But that technology is not really accessible for a third of the population of, and if we look at the world, it's really, more than half of the population can't have access to the technology that we think is so great. So it kind of piggies back onto the previous thing about what's visible or invisible. Instead of thinking about somebody could, we should just always assume somebody does, period. They just do. And so everything that we do should be with a focus of what can we do to make lives of everyone, because everyone has something, better. And I don't know what we can, I mean, technology is really great, but it's so limited in its scope for accessibility to a lot of people that we have an overdependence upon it, and it's not really effective because it's really a small little part of the world. So how do we take that advancement and actually make it global, make it worldwide, make it statewide? I mean, just go anywhere and you can find people camping out in a coffee shop because they don't have internet at home. Or, when I was in education, working, I worked at a private, not-for-profit Catholic university where it was very expensive to go to college, but they also had a lot of opportunity for people who have of diverse backgrounds. And so I work in a field that is typically female. There's not a lot of male interpreters out there. There's not a lot of male interpreter educators out there, but there's also a lot of people who are not, the population itself is not, there's a glass ceiling that a lot of deaf people hit and a lot of people in my field hit. And it's, I mean, I would consider it human services. So it's difficult to provide access to somebody with such already, you could list a million things. So technology for me is one of those big things that it's fabulous. It's wonderful. I work in video all the time. I work on the Jetsons video phones that came actually out of deafness. It didn't come from hearing people. The reason that you have FaceTime and things actually started as this little tiny project in a company that I worked for that AT&T, Verizon, everybody said no to. Nobody's going to want this. This isn't what people are going to want. And now in 2020, and that was not very long ago, maybe 18 years ago. So in 2020 now, everybody wants it, but not everybody has access to it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Wendy, I have a question for you, because one of the things you mentioned in your introduction is there have been incredible insights in examining the workarounds that consumers with disabilities have come up with in your research. Is there an example? Because as Todd was speaking about so much technology being centered on one experience, I started thinking about, wow, is there an interesting or compelling example? I mean, kind of like what Todd mentioned with video chat, where you've seen, something amazing come out of a workaround that you've observed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think voice assistant is another technology that was created with the blind, low vision population in mind. And that was a product that really helped to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of the general population incredibly. Along the lines of FaceTime, like who would think, why do I need to talk into my phone when I can just type into my phone? But it increases the effectiveness of our lives on a daily basis. So I think that there are a lot of tech advancements that start by talking with people with disabilities, who are using those workarounds and are very dependent on technology. A lot of our respondents, they couldn't participate in research because they can't leave their homes. So now the tech world has really opened up doors to talk to all kinds of different consumers of all, disability levels. So I think it's just technology has really advanced our field in a wonderful way.
Deborah, I'm curious, are there any trends or phenomenons that you found have been influential or disruptive when you think about health equity or, connecting with all types of consumers?
Well, a lot of the trends tend to, for example, if we speak about it from a consumer's perspective, and I was thinking about that throughout this conversation, for example, cancer patients may in fact go through a series of things depending on, for example, if they've had chemotherapy or chemotherapy and radiation or surgery or those types of things. from a consumer perspective, and I've seen it grow in the last 5 years, really, which is fantastic. Initially having caps that protect women's hair or men who also get cancer or breast cancers or any types of cancers, but just those caps, for example. Now there's different types of styles that would make someone feel beautiful or prettier because they've lost all their hair or their wigs, and there are different types of consumer item products such as prosthetics, and where an individual can't tell that someone has had some type of surgery where they've lost particularly breast surgery or anything of that nature. So it's really grown a lot, and that's a trend that continues from things in precision medicine, for example, or medical devices that are very helpful with the non-visible disabilities, for example. So those are some of the trends that I'm seeing, and really happy to see that it's increasing actually in terms of consumer products and inventions.
I'm also curious. And this is for
Janelle, real quick.
Go for it. Go for it.
Yes. So one, Todd, I'll be honest with you. I want to find a place where there's no technology or access, because I want to go there for at least a month and take a break. So I do agree with you that it helps. The positives is I can be on a webinar or be in a meeting or get an email from somebody, and I have no idea if they're missing legs. I have no idea what their background is. And they can be as intelligent as they want to be, and there's no judgment from my eyeballs if I do have any bias. So I think, with technology, it's great because it's enabled people who have limited mobility and other issues to reach out to the entire world and connect and impact. I think it's also, the anxiety piece. It's made this world where it's instant gratification and response required. And I know if I don't respond to somebody's email or text, then they're like, oh, is he mad at me? He hasn't responded in 28 seconds. There's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad. But the last thing, if we can figure out how to keep, and I've recently had to deal with kids committing suicide at 14 and 16 years old, there's no safe place due to technology. And I've got 2 girls here that my friends that are at the lake, and they've been at the lake for the last day and a half, and they've been on their cell phones the whole time. So a child is seemingly in a safe place in the confines of their own home, they're not, because they can be bullied from Lake Martin at the lake house from anywhere in the world. And recently, a friend of mine's 14-year-old, a guy that he knows, 14-year-old, shot himself. And I hear about these suicides every day because people are doing cyberbullying and reaching out and violating them in their own home and bullying them in their own safe place due to the accessibility. So one of the things I'm focused on is trying to figure out how to limit that, how to prevent that, but also how to get youth engaged in natural resources, how to get youth engaged in doing something besides getting on their cell phones, and how to have them doing something besides staying on technology. So there's a happy median, and we send a lot of at Warriors Heart and a couple other substance abuse places. And there's something to be said when the first rule is you can't have a cell phone, and they limit it to 30 minutes or an hour a day. And that's a part of dual diagnosis treatment, both anxiety, depression, suicidal ideations, and substance abuse. Every clinic across the country takes your cell phone first. If that doesn't tell you something. So, it helps, it enables a lot of technology, it enables us to reach out to people literally across the world, but there's also some evil in it if we're not careful too. So we've got to figure out how to limit that, and still be successful with it.
Yeah, it's a really,
no, I was just going to, a little piece we were saying about the equity as well, is that when it comes to equity and equality, we have all of these marvelous technologies that we're speaking about now for the consumer and the market. However, in the equity piece or space of it, everyone does not have access to that. They do not have the resources or the funds to that. They don't have individuals to come into their communities, be it a rural community. So there are still a lot of barriers to overcome when it comes to health equity, and those are some of the biggest trends. And we did get that highlighted. We've seen that highlighted here post-COVID, where the struggle to get underserved populations and vulnerable populations into clinical trials. And the clinical trial of, okay, we have the products of the vaccines, the pharmaceuticals are spinning out the vaccines, for elderly and children and that type of thing. But that gap remains in equity but they're still not getting people of color or vulnerable populations into the clinical trials for the very vaccines that may prevent or save a life from COVID. So again, that access is a very big piece, and it continues to be so when it comes to health equity.
Yeah, it definitely feels like access is this double-edged sword, right? Depending on who you are, where you are. And so there are obviously things that we can do to increase accessibility, but then also sort of create some moderation for younger people, for other populations. I'm curious, one of the things that I love about each of you and your experiences is that you've had the opportunity to work with so many different organizations and so many different brands in many different contexts. I'm curious, who do you think is doing it well outside of your current organization? Is there a brand or a product that you find connects with consumers with disabilities in a masterful way, in your opinion?
I'll start on that one just because I just had an experience talking to someone, and they were talking about can I say the clothing company name?
Yeah, sure.
It's called Tomboy X. It's an LGBTQ founded clothing company, and they create cool clothes that look great, and kind of behind the scenes, or you have to go looking for it if you don't know, they have underwear for people with incontinence issues. So I just thought that that was a really great example where everything is equally stylish, but some of them are designed for a certain population. And I really like that idea because everyone shops there, and that includes people, who have incontinence.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I hadn't learned about Tomboy X before, but as you were saying that, I'm reminded of Skims. Actually, I don't know how many people have heard of that brand, but it's Kim Kardashian's sort of underwear lingerie line, and they position it as underwear for everybody. And so when they first came on the market, they had a very wide range of skin tones. Or colors in terms of having underwear that matches your skin tone, and then obviously a very large size ranging from like extra small to like I think 4X or something like that. And one of the things that they recently introduced is adaptive underwear. So not things that everyone thinks about, but really helpful for everyone, like bras that open in the front, not just in the back, which as we age, are underwear that opens on the sides as opposed to that you have to take all the way off. And it's really interesting because as we age, or even after having a baby, I can think about how masterful, honestly, it is that some of these conveniences are where, you can imagine the type of like maneuvering people have to do to just get underwear on, even without a disability. So sorry, sorry about that example.
No, that's great. I was also going to say that, from a research perspective, I think that there's a real distinction between companies who really want to understand the populations that are out there, especially those with disabilities, and who actually invest in those conversations and go out, talk to those people, do foundational research so that they can understand
how do you tell the difference? That's a really interesting thing. Like when you're working with a brand partner, how do you really tell that they're invested or they really care about creating products that work for everyone?
I think it's immediately obvious, honestly, because if I raise the topic of, well, are you thinking about this? And they say no, then they're not, and they're either open to it or they're not. I think a lot of clients will come with a question in mind. So I think a little humility goes a long way, admitting that they don't know the population that they're trying to target, rather than just initially saying, hey, we want to put this ad out. Is this a good ad or not? Saying, we want to put an ad out. We want it to hit this population. Can you tell us about those people and tell us, what's important to them and what their lives are like?
I've got a good example, Janelle, real quick about that. Not from a brand standpoint, but from another nonprofit standpoint. My senior mentor is Lieutenant General James Laster, who is the Chief of Staff for the Marine Corps, and he's now the President and CEO for Marine Toys for Tots. And I did an internship with him as I was retiring from the Marine Corps. And he sat in front of the staff and they briefed on all the wonderful things they were doing for Toys for Tots and all the less fortunate children that they were able to impact. and they had the map up, and they had 830 programs across the US. And he said, that's amazing. I'm proud of everything y'all are doing. Where are we not helping? Y'all have got 3 months to look at the map, look at the US, and say, where are all the kids that do not get a Christmas? Where are the most less fortunate children across the US? Where are we not covering? That's where I want to be now. We've done the good stuff, congratulations, but it was just a unique approach. And I think brands can do that too, or should do that. We're successful here. That's great. Kudos, pat on the back. Now, where are we not successful during market research? Where do we need to impact? And the general, that was his first approach, is there's a kid out there that's not getting Christmas. There's a kid out there that doesn't have that experience. I want you to find that out. You've got 3 months, go.
Yeah.
And since he's been the CEO, the program has grown so much and is impacting so many more children. So it's very inspirational to see that approach from a 3-star general in the Marine Corps. And I was proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think just underscores even what Noah was saying about just asking the right questions or new questions and understanding who we could better serve. We love to talk about illuminating intersectional experiences more so now. And I'm curious, what intersectional experiences should we anticipate when we're thinking about people with disabilities? You know, is it ability in age? Is it ability in class, ability in race, ability in gender? Give me a sense for the ones that you typically anticipate. Anyone?
I'm going to say age is a major one, and that is because it cuts across all classes, races, and so forth. And because we have an aging population that particularly here in the US, we call them baby boomers, for example, you know, and we're at the beginning of that. So that, and then, you know, we have also the technologies and innovations that we're speaking of that are allowing people to live longer with a disability or an illness. So we have that compoundedness of age, as well as perhaps from a veteran's perspective, you're missing a limb due to an event that occurred in your life, their experience, or cancer, or whatever that may be. You're still able to be here, excuse me, but also how are you able to perform? So I think that when we tend to, in years past, we would say, well, you're retiring at 65, and you know, you get, it used to be you get your, what is it, Rolodex watch and your pension and those,
Rolex. Yeah.
yeah, watch, you know, you can tell I didn't have one. So Rolodex watch. The iPhone watch now, right? But all that's gone. Okay, so when we look at that, even with from baby boomers to millennials, you know, millennials taught everyone that we already know there is no pension at the end of the rainbow. We know there's no, you know, special watch or pension or Social Security and those types of things. So we have to, I think age is the one that I would say cuts across all of the trends that we're speaking of. And then looking at this aging population where now you're having to perhaps work till you're 67 or 70 or 72 or even 80 if you like. I mean, I know a couple of friends of mine whose fathers founded the business, so they worked till they died, which means about 80 something years old. But that may not be the case for everyone, but you kind of get what I'm going to. So I would say.
And Deborah, to throw something else into the mix, when you add technology onto, you know, that aging demographic, there are a lot of systems and processes that are creating dependencies on technology to get things done, such as, you know, banking or shopping or even seeing your, you know, your doctor's reports and that sort of thing. So a lot of the aging population is also relying on their children or their caregivers to help them manage this whole process. So I think that's where that aging demographic impacts the technology industry and just considerations to make, you know, as we're doing research for those populations.
I would definitely agree with that. Just that caveat. Last night I was trying to FaceTime my mother, and you know, the screen stayed black, and she kept saying, "I'm trying to find the button. I'm trying to find the button." Like, Mom, we've shown you the button many times. And so I had to hang up so she could call me back and find the right button to do FaceTime. So you're right. It is certainly that they have to deal with the confronting and facing the new technology and that aging population.
Yeah.
Well,
But
I think
what
the biggest thing is the purpose. My dad's 93 years old. His nickname is Pine Cone, and he's on the farm right now picking up pine cones and cleaning up, and he weed eats every day for 8 or 9 hours. But regardless if you're 93-year-old pine cone or if you're a veteran that's missing a limb or whatever situation you're in life, that purpose and that mental ability to push through whatever you're going through and that one word resiliency will get you through anything. And my dad told me years ago, he didn't want to be here anymore because he didn't have a purpose. And I gave him a purpose through Hero and through helping veterans and first responders. And now every day he has a purpose. He knows he needs to get the farm ready for veterans that are coming in. He has to do this. He has to do those various things. So the purpose in waking up every day and having your feet hit the ground and knowing that you have a reason to be here, I think that changes a lot, regardless of your disability, regardless of your age, regardless of what you're going through. Your mental ability to push through adversity and to have resiliency and to realize that you do belong, you do have a purpose, and you have a reason for being here will get you through anything you're going through, regardless if you're old, if you're missing a limb, if you're deaf. That resiliency and that purpose will help you get through any obstacle. Obstacle is the way. Obstacle is not in the way, it is the way.
It is so fascinating that you say that because I recall doing quite a bit of actually oncology research in the past where one of the things that was really insightful for me is, someone who's recently diagnosed with cancer and realizing some physical limitations that they now have that they didn't have before, they're really, being immersed in a new culture, so to speak. And I don't think until I did that research and had that perspective, I never thought of, people with disabilities or people with a certain type of ability limitation having their own sort of culture and a number of things that they could share in common, like feeling isolated, or needing to identify a new purpose or a revised purpose. I'm curious, can we talk a little bit about culture and what perspective we can share with the audience? Like, as you've taken the time to learn more about these different audiences and different ability levels, what have you learned about culture that maybe, the everyday person may not be aware of? Todd, can you weigh in on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, deafness is a culture. People who are deaf with a big D deaf, and there's, okay, so big D deaf, let's say you had deaf parents, deaf grandparents, all your family members are deaf, you went to a deaf residential school, you went to Gallaudet University, so you've lived your whole life as a deaf person. So you live in a group that's everybody's deaf. You go to church, it's deaf. You go to your doctor, he's deaf. You see your lawyer, he's deaf. Everybody, so your whole world is deaf. So that's a culture that a lot of hearing people don't know even exists. So, and part of that reason is because as a child, when you're born, oftentimes children are born to parents who are hearing. So that percentage is huge. Maybe 90% of the population who is deaf were born into hearing families. So the one deaf child is the oddball out in the family generation of all hearing people. So, but hearingness is a culture too. We all live in multiple cultures. We just do have multiple cultures, but it's difficult to look at something that's not your culture because there's all kinds of societal things, and disability is one of those things that we look at. But look at our screen here. We have a very diverse group of people. We all have our own cultural history, cultural backgrounds, where we came from. Yet we all have a lot of things that the world will look at us and say we're very able-bodied and can function. And we design products for you people because you're the able-bodied ones. So culture to me is really one of those. You really have to. Noah mentioned it. Lee has mentioned it. You really have to listen and invite those who are not like you to the table. But the hard part about that is that when you invite them to the table, you make a little checklist that goes, hey, I invited somebody to the table, and you check the little check mark, but then they never get to participate. They never get to be an active member at the table. So listening is a huge part of it, but then taking it to the next part, and Lee has the, I mean, when you're talking about resiliency and purpose, and you just have to do, listening and then doing whatever that cultural wants to do of you, not with judgment. As Lee said, when somebody sends you an email, it's just a bunch of words, and you can read the words and there's no judgment on those words most of the time. Well, I mean, there can be, but you know what I mean? It's just you don't have a preconceived notion. You're just reading a script off of a piece of paper. So don't bring to the table your expectations of what that culture is going to bring to you, because that culture is going to bring to you some incredibly fascinating, wonderful, diverse, illuminating. I mean, when I got adopted, yeah, I would say that I've been adopted by the deaf culture. I'm not a deaf person. I don't have deafness in my family. You know, I just started this career many years ago because deaf people looked at me and saw something in me that said, you need to do this. They're the ones who decided I became an interpreter. They're my gatekeepers. They're ones who invited me in. And I think I got invited in so deeply into their culture because I just kept saying, okay, I trust you. What's next? Okay, let's do this. Okay, teach me, help me, let me see, let me be a part of. And when that happens so successfully, I think that people forget that I'm a hearing person in my deaf world of friends. They don't really, I'm not a hearing person to them. I'm part of their community, part of their oneness, part of their culture, which is really cool for me. But how do we broaden that to, I mean, I'll talk about my own family. My parents they still think that I do something with that braille and help people to read books or something. I mean, honestly, they just don't have much of a clue as to what it is that I do. And it's interesting how no matter what I say, no matter what again, I think it's about the whole listening part. There's a lot of words that get spoken, but how do you take that in so that you can really be part of whatever it is? And when you can do that, you know, the world is wonderful. I sound very utopian, but it can be wonderful. What is that from 2001? Is it something wonderful is about to happen?
Yeah.
So, and it can be wonderful, but you really have to be able to be willing and open and interested and engaged and just all those things that seem so obvious, but it's very difficult to achieve a lot
Yeah.
of times in busy worlds.
We have a few minutes left, and so I want to ask two questions. The first one, if we could touch on it quickly, and the second one, I think will be a little bit more interesting. But Noah said something earlier in the conversation about people with non-visible disabilities and their actions having the potential to be misinterpreted. And it reminded me, you know, last summer, I read this headline that I was totally shocked by. And it stated that half of all people killed by police in the US have some sort of disability. I was literally on the floor. And then I started doing a little bit more research on it and read and learned that when we add an intersectional lens to it, for instance, that Black Americans with a disability, it's a little even scarier. And more than half of them are arrested by the time they're 20 years old. So a Black American with a disability, more likely to be arrested, and almost all arrested by the time they're 20 years old. Obviously, it depends on what kind of disability. And I'll be honest, I didn't know how to process this, thinking that people with disabilities are more likely to be arrested or even killed in places where they should be safe. You know, and I know safety is something that we've talked about a little bit as well. How should we think about race and ability intersecting? How should we think about safety? How should we think about, you know, any of this? I want a couple of you to weigh in before we go to our last question, because it's interesting to think about, you know, converging identities and experiences and protecting the most vulnerable among us.
Well, and in deafness, it's very similar to, especially with
Yeah.
police interactions, and deafness is, again, very high mortality and or arrested and or beaten and or, because honestly, when a deaf person gets pulled over and they say, hand me your license and registration, which, you know, every deaf person knows that, but when you are deaf and you're reaching toward the glove compartment and the cop is yelling at you, which you can't hear, the cop assumes you're reaching for something that's not just your piece of paper that's called a registration, and things happen. So the whole thing about the safety aspect, or even, I don't know how to broaden it, but just remembering that because everyone is really different and because there are a lot of hidden sorts of things, I'm not sure where it started that we assumed the worst instead of just assuming the best. And I think a root of that for me is that a lot of times the assumption is for the worse. Like if you hire a deaf person, it's going to be, you're going to make the company go bankrupt because you got to hire an interpreter who costs $50 an hour to come in to train this person for 8 hours, or the doctor's office that refuses to see a deaf person because they won't hire an interpreter, and so the deaf person dies because they didn't get to see their doctor because the doctor said, no, I'm not going to hire an interpreter. I mean, there's just, why do we assume the worst? And can we flip the lens to assume the best? I don't know how to do that, but
Todd, I think our country's education system is pretty terrible. So we've got a lack of education across the country. If you find a good education system, stay there, don't move. But the lack of education and between the lack of solid policies, and the main thing is technology has increased the ability for the media to spread hate and misinformation across. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter what it is. There's misinformation on all parts, and you're getting the worst thing because they want to create divisiveness with all of us. They want you to see me in Alabama being a white man, and immediately you have your bias. And the media, they want you to be angry. They want you to, pick a side with Roe versus Wade. They want you to pick a side with police violence. Any of these things, they're going to trigger something that you focus on. So now you're angry. Or we could just go out and do and help our community. But I mean, a lot of this stuff, even in Tuskegee, Alabama, which is where I live, we have a drug issue, we have a theft issue, we have trash everywhere. And then our focus is increase in small businesses. We got to fix the root of the problem first. We have to help education. We have to help with the drug issues. We have to help with the violence and the criminal acts, or there's always going to be trash. So let's not focus on small business development. Let's clean up the issues we have. And it's a lot of the technology piece we discussed earlier that's creating this divisive world we live in. And instead of getting informed ourselves, we look at Fox, CNN, MSNBC, whatever your flavor is, and that's our education platform. That's not education, that's entertainment. It's literally these people getting paid to say this stuff. So let's just stop and realize that Todd, Janelle, Noah, y'all aren't bad people. I don't look at you, know anything about you except you're great people that spend an hour with me. And let's assume everyone's good, but let's put some money into education. Let's put some money in educating ourselves the right way and not picking a side on something that a lot of times we don't even have a dog in the fight.
Yeah, I love that. We have literally a few seconds left, and I'd love for us to quickly make like a list of do's and don'ts of things we should consider, think about, do or not do when it comes to authentically connecting with people with disabilities. Already I've collected a number of them that we've said in the course of the conversation. So don't bring your cultural expectations to the table. Try and understand theirs. Withhold judgment. Non-visible disabilities can be easily misinterpreted. Don't assume the worst. Assume everyone has some sort of ability challenge as sort of a starting place. And do go out and help the community. And don't move if you live in an area with great education. Any other do's and don'ts you'd like to add to the list? Deborah, do you want to start?
Humility is a big one in any circumstance, visible or non-visible disabilities, as well as culture and a lot of the other topics that we've spoken about. So I'm going to say do on the humility and don't assume.
Okay, Wendy, you're up next.
Do invite consumers with disabilities to be part of the conversation. Include even a small group of consumers with disabilities to the table to ideate and to innovate.
Love that. Noah, do or don't?
I would say do check for understanding. I think that a lot of times I see people who think that they have a sense of what's going on and act out of that, but it's always a good idea to just make sure that what you think you understand is actually what's going on.
Love that. Todd, do you have a do or don't for me?
do listen with an open mind and an open heart.
Mhm. And last but not least, Lee, do or don't.
Do a lot more of helping your community, being a good person, having compassion, loving your community, and do a lot less social media, and this world will be a better place.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, sharing your expertise and perspective with us. This was another phenomenal conversation, and it would not have been that way without each one of you contributing to it. So thank you so much. And with that, Ellen, I will pass it back to you.
Wow, I just really want to thank Janelle and our amazing guests for today's really, truly candid discussion. And thank you everyone for sticking with us. And in the meantime, and at any time, we welcome the opportunity to speak with you. So please reach out to us directly. That now concludes today's Ipsos webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
God bless.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.